internet is unstable, please forgive me. I'm on a tiny shed, so the internet might be unstable. Oh, as it is now. So I'm gonna, Falguni, please step in if ever my internet freezes, if you don't mind. Falguni is in Mumbai and has a better internet connection than I do. I'll just briefly say where we are. I'm in Maine, USA. Matilda and Sheshti are in Sweden. Yuri in Switzerland. Tash, you're in Devon, is that correct? Tash is in Devon. And Norman is in Belgium, and Heather Ward is trying to join us from London. Mark, where are you joining us from?
York, UK.
York, terrific. Wonderful. And Sarah, how about you?
I'm in Northumberland, north of England.
Lovely. Zandile, are you in Berlin? And Ayushi and Lalu. If you don't mind, put your location in the chat if you can manage. That would be really fascinating. Hi, Ayushi.
Hello, I'm from Mumbai, India.
Wonderful, wonderful to see you today. Thanks for joining. Okay, Tina. Oh, Tina's great in Dorset. Wonderful. And I think Zandile is in Berlin. Okay, and we're waiting for Heather to join us. So let me just briefly introduce the topic, which I'm sure you are you've read, which is about working as theater artists with community, and the way in which we can feel that this experience has a lot of integrity, and also the ways in which sometimes we might feel that we become slightly separated from the community, which becomes our focus. This is a topic that came up in brainstorming with my colleagues. I'm going to, partly because my internet is so unstable, but also because I'd really like to hand the microphone over. I'm going to ask my colleagues to introduce themselves and to give some anecdotal references to this topic and sort of explore it a little bit, to unpack it. Please feel free to put questions, comments, ideas into the chat. The first 45 minutes are recorded. The second 45 are not recorded. We'll round up our comments, within 45 minutes, and then we'll open up and start. So we'll get an informal thing, but we do have that demarcation of recorded and unrecorded. So I'm going to start with Sheshti, who's in Falun, Sweden. Sheshti, if you would like to introduce yourself and just give us some ideas around this topic.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sheshti Webb, and I am in Sweden. I have been doing physical theater for most of my life, and I have recently been teaching also, but in the last 10 years after moving to Sweden, I started getting interested in community and how theater is different around the world. So I've ended up spending some time teaching and doing interactive theater projects and residencies and retreats and conferences around the world. Some in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, and in Switzerland with people from some 11 different countries, with 2 warring countries from Casamance in Senegal. And so I've had some interesting experiences there. And then also back here in Sweden in 2015, obviously, a lot of refugees coming in from Syria, and with a mixture of refugees coming in from Northern Africa and the Middle East and different places. So I've spent a lot of time working with people where I immediately got accepted because I was also coming from a different place. And I noticed that the difference of people who were Swedes who had never been outside of the country working in the same projects. So after a while, I started to realize that it could be because of my own experience and relating to never really fitting in anywhere. And so I had, for instance, the experience when I was faced with 100 people from different parts of the countries, and I knew I had 20 people who were from 2 different warring nations, 10 from either side in Casamance. And we were going to do interactive exercise where they were going to create an installation together. And I couldn't speak their language and I wasn't sure who was where. And it ended up being a beautiful experience just because we didn't speak each other's language and just because I focused on the theater as opposed to the political and the emotions and all of these other things that were there. And so I have very much felt like I've been part, sorry, phone calls interrupt Zoom apparently. So because of the theater, I feel like actually that's the safest place to be accepted into community. In some ways, as an artist, I feel like we can cross boundaries where other people don't know how because we speak the same language. Somehow it speaks for all people on the same level. Doesn't need to be a hierarchy, and we're already on the outside. So in some ways we can relate to each other there as people. So there's that. And then my experience of moving, I'm Swedish. I lived from when I was 19, I moved out of Sweden and then I came back in my 30s. And so all of a sudden I came back thinking this was my country, only to find out that I wasn't actually accepted back into my country from the artist's perspective. So from, it's a very small country and it has an old tradition of theater, and it's kind of had a small group of people. There's 5,000 or was 5,000 actors in this country. And there wasn't a way to come in if you hadn't gone through the national way of getting into the theater scene. So I have I have 10 years of experience now of trying to be part of an artist network that is so insular that the system itself has built walls around it that you can't come in. But because of the influx of people coming from refugees and stuff have come in, there has been now a flashlight been shining on this problem that they didn't even know they had before. So when you were an individual person coming from the outside, you were just shut out. But now, because so many people have come in, all of a sudden it's the unions are talking about it. It's a conversation that's happening in the country. So I would say that the bigger problem here is not being part of the community. It's about opening up so that the artist's culture is part of the community, the type of community we think about in the rest of the world, because it's been like an elite sport almost, where only a certain few are let into. So those are the two perspectives I come from.
Thank you, Sheshti. That's really interesting. I'm just writing ideas that resonate with me and putting those in the chat in case they're of interest to other people and they can spark off further comments and discussions. Matilda, do you want to? We're going to move. We're going to move geographically, staying in Sweden. Matilda, would you like to do the same?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So I'm Matilda Blomqvist, and I'm an actor, producer, director, and the founder of the theater company Melpomalia Friteater here in Sweden. And I also have a bachelor's degree in intercultural science, focused mostly on identity and narrative identity and performing identity. And yeah, so I work with that and incorporate that in my work in theater. And yeah, and this the thing with the community and theater is very interesting, because I think of it a lot like we as human beings are always part of a community, whether we like it or not. So through theater we can like examine the communities that we are in ourselves and the communities that we see around us. And yeah, so I'm thinking about a project I was a part of, or that I initiated here in Borlänge, where we made a production that in English it's called I Am Thinking About Stupid Things. So it was a mixture between devising and script-based theater. So, and it was very, very interesting for me, because I come mostly from the beginning from a more traditional theater background, and to work more with this experience with devising and working with improvisation. And the project was with me as an actor and also as a director and other actors that collaborated and created the themes that we wanted to discuss and explore, mostly with both text and through our bodies. And yeah, so like the mixture between how we can both use devising and improvisation, and also use text to both explore theater and community, like within the productions we do, is one experience that I thought about. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Matilda. And let's move to you, Yuri, in Switzerland.
Thank you, Amy. Hi, everyone. And thank you for the invitation to be part of this community. It's really exciting. I am currently in Switzerland, but I'm originally from Mexico City. And I work as a physical theater performer. And I am also a stage director for opera. And that passion started since I was little, and I had done music studies, and then I was able to kind of blend the classical music studies with physical theater. And while I was studying with Amy in London about 10 years ago, I started to collaborate with opera companies who were creating new work. And when I went back to Mexico about 5 years ago, I started my own company to work in creating new opera. And that has been a challenge in my community as well, because opera has been associated to the elite generally, and to a very isolated part of society that is closed, and that it's an expensive art. And I've been working really hard to try to bring the opera out of the theaters, and created a festival, trained companies to create new work. And that has been an incredible journey for me, because it has kind of created bridges amongst the different parts of society that wouldn't necessarily collide or have dialogues together. And maybe I can share one project that speaks of this, which I'm currently developing at the moment. It's a long-term project. It started 2 years ago and achieved a first phase in the spring this year. And it's a new opera that we are creating with refugees at the border with Mexico and the US. So this project started when I decided to go and visit the border cities in Mexico and the US, which are divided by a huge wall. There's a huge metal wall that divides both countries. It actually has 2 layers, and it's very impressive to see. It's definitely a symbolic statement. The real wall is the law that prevents refugees to access asylum in the US. And so lately, in the last 2 or 3 years, there have been huge amounts of Central American refugees arriving to the US by foot through Mexico. And in 2019, there was a new law that was put in place by Trump that prevented refugees, asylum seekers who were looking for asylum in the US to be in American territory during their court hearings and during their processes. And so they were sent back to Mexico to wait for their processes to happen. And that was a very strong new law that had a huge impact in thousands and hundreds of thousands of people. And so I started to visit the border cities and to meet some of the refugees who were waiting for 15 months maybe, and just crossing the border to their court hearings on the day they had court, and then sent back to Mexico with no protection whatsoever, and living in the streets and looking for shelters. And the Mexican government wouldn't provide any shelters either. So the fact that they were staying for so long in one place allowed me to create a project with them, which was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever done. And it was about creating an opera together. And the point of doing an opera for me, as opposed to straight theater, was because I felt their situation was universal. And it was a situation that many, many, many communities around the globe are living at the moment, and probably have always lived in human history. And so the music, singing these stories, would allow us to communicate with the globe, and would try to share these stories beyond our language, and so using a musical language. And so I spent many days visiting the shelters and listening to the stories of mostly children and young people. And I created a libretto, which was a story that I gave to a composer, and I commissioned a music score, which later on we were able to invite an orchestra and a choir to record in a studio to have a music track, so that we could just spend time in the shelters using that music to train refugees to perform. And so ideally we would have brought the live music to the shelters, but the budget wouldn't allow us to do so, or at least we haven't had the budget to do that yet. However, the musical recording was amazing. And so I put together a team of street dancers and stage creators. And so we spent some time inviting people in the shelters, anyone who would want to be part of a group, dance, and be in the center of a circle. So those were the only requirements to be part of the project, just to want to share who you are. And we had to audition because a lot of people signed up for that, and we were only able to have a group of 30 people working in the project because they were earning a salary. So this was a paid work. And the 30 people we invited were from different countries. We're all in the same situation, waiting to apply for asylum in the US, but in Mexico. And we had children from 9-year-olds and up to 67-year-olds. And some people didn't even speak Spanish. And they still joined the project. And it was a beautiful encounter in an arts center where we actually first of all, trained people to feel comfortable with their bodies, feel comfortable walking in front of an audience, feel comfortable in the center of, in the middle of a circle, and then start to explore their journeys as people who have walked by foot to look for a better life. And so they started to find their own movement and their own gestures to express their life stories, how they missed home, how their sadness for not being able to see their grandmother anymore, not being able to eat their favorite dish anymore. And so this was quite an intense process where the whole community started to hold the space for these stories to take shape. And then we introduced the music of the project, and we had a session studying the hero's journey and studying the musical composition that was trying to support these stories together. And so we put together a performance that we were able to share with an audience on one day. We were able to bring the families who were in the shelters of the performers to watch the performance. It was an incredibly moving day. It was life transforming for them to really, what was the most important thing for them was to realize they had an artist in them that hadn't been seen and hadn't been heard. And it was so true. It was just incredibly honest. And it didn't require that much skill, although we did craft the performance as much as we could. And so the next step for this project, because we were only able to share it with an audience on one day, it's very hard to bring an audience to refugee shelters. It's impossible to bring the refugees out of the shelters to perform. So we brought in a camera that is 360, and which was one device we found out we could use to create an immersive experience for an audience later on to watch on VR goggles, and or eventually on a dome, on a 360 projection, and to feel that they are in that space with them. Now, the performance they created and we created together is a celebration. It really is being in a community, in a party, basically, and celebrating their strength and their hero within. So it's not portraying their being a victim, which was very beautiful also and strengthening for them. And so it really is a project that communicates a real geographical crisis, so to speak, in this place, in this moment, with this specific law that Trump initiated. And it's expanding that towards the international or the global reality of people moving. And the music that is transmitting this is actually making a bridge between these art forms that are generally not together, opera and street dance. And so that was a beautiful link that I was surprised worked really well, and people didn't feel separated. People didn't feel that they didn't belong to this music, or that the singers and the orchestra that didn't belong to the street and to people who live in the streets. And so that was a beautiful way to bridge those gaps and to create some dialogue about the situation, and basically to empathize with the life stories of these communities and to reduce the xenophobia and the racism. And so it'll still develop, and we'll see. We're looking for funding to be able to build this dome and hopefully share the 360 production, and to tour the show from south to north and to cross the borders, so that we can share this performance that was created in a community, within the community, with them, and to share it along the general path that they do. And so, yeah, this is an experience that I have been going through this year and that I wanted to share in this setup because it really feels that it started in a tiny little place and that it speaks universally about a global theme.
Wonderful, Yuri. Thank you. There's been some questions that have come up as you've been speaking, and I'm going to pose them to you now that we're on this discussion of your work. Tina has asked, did the composer use any musical references from the musical cultures of the refugees?
Yes, I worked with a composer for a long time. We used many, the rhythms, the exact rhythms and the speed of the music that street dancers use. And so we based the composition on something that could be danced with the specific steps and rhythms that we were studying in the street dancing technique, and which is called krump in specific, and breakdancing. And we also quoted a lot of Baroque composers because the orchestra and the choir were Baroque musicians. And so we had quotes from Vivaldi specifically and Bach. And then we quoted Pink Floyd as well, because we were talking about The Wall, and we studied Pink Floyd, The Wall video and the animation of these caricatures. And so that was an influence for the singers, those images. And so we used some quotes of that as well. But yes, we definitely worked with the music of the community.
Look, your work has spurred so many questions. Why don't we just, this is, we don't have to stick to any kind of form here. Tina, you want to continue with your questions and then we'll move to you, Tracy? Is it okay if you can come unmute yourself, Tina?
Yes, I mean, I just led on to the question which I put up there is, were the refugees aware of the global dimension of their work? Or was it more about their own personal stories? Just come from a community meeting in our county of Dorset, where the awareness of the global issues around art and culture and community working was almost non-existent. Everything was very localized, very intense, very focused on their own personal work and the problems they had working within their community in the county. Very difficult to get, and these are not refugees, these are people who are living in the county. So I'm just wondering whether the refugees were aware of the power of their work on a global level, or whether it was very personally experienced from their own suffering.
That's a great question. So the way I introduced the project for them when I invited them to apply was I did tell them it was going to be filmed and it would be a VR experience. And so they were excited that this was going to have a video format. And when we started working, it was very much about their personal journeys. But surprisingly enough, somebody told someone in the media about the project, and TV started to show up every day in our rehearsal room. And I was very caring about that. And I wasn't really happy that we were having journalists come to register the project, and I tried to keep them away. And the refugees said, no, we want them in. We're actually really excited that they started to volunteer to get interviewed. And that opened a whole new dimension for the project that I hadn't envisioned, which was about sharing with the globe through the news what they were doing. And they were so happy about it. Many of them had to wear their masks and had sunglasses because they are persecuted. They are running. Many of them have been threatened, and they can't go back, and they can't be seen online. And so they had to cover themselves, and they still wanted to be on camera and express what they were doing. And it was incredibly moving to see that they really had a voice, and they were voicing out this, and they were just sharing the transformative power of the project, or dancing and doing music and doing theater, but also expressing how desperate they were in their situation. So that was something we didn't plan, but that I guess had an effect in the project, and it was really opening them yeah, to connect with other people who were in their same situation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Tracy, would you like to come on?
Yeah. Hi, Yuri.
Good to see you.
So, I know, exactly. I'm curious if you're looking at doing this work with additional groups, either on the Mexico-US border or even on other borders where there are refugee situations happening all over the world. And kind of in the same line as what Tina was asking, I mean, I had that same kind of question, like it's such a, there's so much depth to this project because there is the personal, there is the political, there is, awareness around, what's really happening in the world for people in so many locations, and how is it, also impacting then, the people that live on the borders. I mean, there's just so many elements to it. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, I mean, you've talked about how, you wanted to be able to share these stories with the globe. I mean, it sounds like you're making some movement towards that, and certainly in ways that you expected and didn't expect. But would you see this as a project that could be done in other places, or would you, what from a bigger picture, what are you thinking about in terms of that?
Definitely, yes. It really became at the middle of the development of the music score. We realized it was totally doable to do it in any language, really, in any place, and that it was speaking about a human situation, and so it definitely that's the vision also, to be able to do it in other borders. And what I found after completing this first phase is what was more moving about it was that they were artists, that we don't associate necessarily a creative being with a person who is in such a difficult life situation, living under a bridge. Like I literally had to open the sewage, like to enter some of the places in these border cities. It's really the worst I have ever seen. People who really have to live in places that I hadn't even imagined existed, and finding out that they're artists was quite moving. And so that's one of the things that I think would contribute to communities who are not refugees, but who are in border cities and who are resistant to receiving these communities, seeing that these communities who come have so much to contribute with beauty and creativity as well. And so sometimes that is just working around the point. People are, this is such a huge crisis in the globe that we don't know what to do anymore. It keeps growing. There's no solution. We don't want to know anymore. It's kind of, I just want to ignore the fact that this is so big and so terrible for so many people. However, if you turn around a little bit and say, oh, there's all these artists arriving, it suddenly changes our idea about the problem. And it's just one way to open up to these realities, and hopefully we'll be able to reproduce this project in other borders. We have had some invitations, but it really needs a budget to be able to hold it, especially because artists got paid. It wasn't a volunteering thing, and that was important, that they committed to the time that they were training and the time that they were performing, and they are co-creators of the project. And so it was important for me that they received yes, a wage for their work. And so for that, we would need to fund it with institutions and NGOs who want to fund these kind of things.
So I just have one follow-up question, going back to traditional opera and the closed environment there. you know, do you see a doorway to moving the community work into a more traditional, not into a traditional framework, but more in collaboration perhaps with opportunities that traditional framework could provide?
Yes, definitely. In fact, I mean, I must mention that the inspiration that I got to do this project came from a project that was done at the opera in Paris, at the Garnier Opera in Paris, and it was about bringing street performers in the main stage, and it was a huge opera performance. That it was a Baroque opera, and from the 17th century, with 200 street dancers on stage, and it was one of the most phenomenal projects that has ever been done in the opera. They did so many more shows than they had planned because the response of the audience was mind-blowing. So that kind of shifted a thing in the opera audience, because it was really about breaking that bridge. I mean, creating that bridge and breaking that gap. And so who knows? I mean, it's all about putting opera together with something that it's not associated to it, and so it becomes more universal, but also it starts to resonate with younger audiences and audiences that are not necessarily don't feel attracted to this kind of art form that seems so distant and so hard to grasp. It is a difficult art form. So when we kind of lower it down to our daily lives, it just becomes easier to open up to that experience, and the music does the rest, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful, cool. Thank you, Yuri. And now let's shift over to the British Isles. Tash, there you are. Please make your remarks to us. It'd be very interesting to hear about your work.
Hello, everybody. Yes, gosh, okay, I've got to transition because I'm now in like listening mode and my brain is like firing off lots of other questions connected with this. Yes, so hi, I'm Natasha. I'm a theatre director, performance practitioner based in the UK. I work in many different fields, whether it's making my own work that sort of crosses into theatre, dance, new writing, always has a particular tone to it, which I can't escape, and that always is a little bit absurd and a little bit funny, if that's your humour. And I also teach a little bit, and but what I wanted to sort of, because of the topic of today, talk about a little bit is different ways in which I've worked within communities in theatre and performance. And when I reflected on that, I realized that I've gone in on the project in many different ways, whether it is working with solely a professional company that kind of then creates something for a particular community to experience, or whether it is working with a community that the theme or the idea has come from that community, and my job as the artist is almost as a facilitator to realize whatever it is that they want to explore, or somebody else has said something that then the artist and the community are then making it for this person. Does that make sense? So I'm just like, it feels like there's many, many, many different ways in which art and the community relate or don't relate. And when I was chatting to Amy about this, the few sort of themes came in, and one of them was this idea that sometimes an artist, I feel, can be parachuted into a community, and that's sort of not always a good thing. So I wanted to open that up for people to talk about or discuss the ethics around it. And I feel like as an artist, you know, maybe this is just me, I'm a chameleon. So if a theme interests me, then I get interested in how is the best way to communicate that with the material that I'm working with. And material can be space, budget, people, you know, so many different avenues. But that, yeah, so I suppose my question can be around the ethics of that, and that, is it enough? Is art enough? Like, it's a bit romantic. It's like, you know, is love enough? But or you have to work quite hard around other areas in your relationship sometimes, you know. And I just question that a little bit. The subject and object of your artwork in this arena is really complex, and power comes into that, I think, a lot. And sometimes that comes from the money side of it, and who's initiated the project or who's funding it and what are the outcomes. And sometimes it doesn't always strictly work like that. It's not as sort of binary and transparent and clear as that. And how do we navigate that? Those are some questions that I had. And also the sort of pastoral side of the of both, actually, not just the artist. That's going to talk selfishly about the artist, but the pastoral side. I know that I've done a few sort of projects where it's quite a big weight on my shoulders to work with particular communities, and it feels like a lot to sometimes be creative, be the loose romantic artist, and then at the same time taking care of some really, really, really serious situations, you know. How we manage that, how we balance that, yes, I was curious about that question of the pastoral relationship in all of that for both. Yeah, but really, those are just some themes. Did I mention power? Yeah, power and money. It's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the specificness. So obviously, sort of for me, like sometimes as an artist, I think of vastness. You know, anything is possible, or at least I like to try and enter a project with that, you know, with that outlook. But sometimes the needs of a particular community are very specific, very niche. Anyway, I'm rambling on, but these are just some things that are playing on my mind around this subject, around this theme. Yeah.
Wonderful. Tash, you've put some really interesting ideas into the space. Zandile, would you like to ask your question now?
Yes, I've just read it.
Hi. Yeah, I think it's not like, it's more like thoughts. It's not like, please answer it fast, but also listening to the people before. Yeah, exactly. It's like more, yeah, like so many positive sides, but then also so many things we have to be critical about. So I was just inspired now listening to you, because I feel very often we are, yeah, just so excited about what art can do, but then there are so many side traps which we need to reflect on, which we don't need to solve, obviously, and we cannot, but it's interesting, I think, to just have questions, I guess. So it's not really a question, but
yeah, the word privilege is really important, I think, especially, I suppose you've articulated it much better than me, thank you. But it was when I talked about ethics, privilege is definitely one of those things that weighs heavy on my shoulders anytime I'm asked to, or I'm interested in doing any kind of outreach work or community work. Yeah, there's a lot of hierarchy actually to take care of. Yeah.
I think I'll look forward to us having more of a round table around this. because I think this is going to be really fertile ground. Well, I suggest we just move to you, Heather, and then we'll finish the recorded bit of the conversation, and then we'll sort of that's okay. I know that you have brief remarks to make, but would you like to introduce yourself and then just the most
You're muted, Heather.
You're still muted.
Sorry.
Muted.
I just wanted to check you could hear me because it was breaking up slightly there for me. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Cool. Hello, everyone. I'm just on my phone, so I can't see anybody, but I'm waving to you all. So my name's Heather Ward, and I am the artistic director and producer of Directors Cut Theatre Company, based in London. So basically, the main work that I do is work with artists. This word facilitator that came up earlier that Amy mentioned as well. So I facilitate a lot of events, and I do a lot of training for actors and writers and directors. So a main part of my work is providing opportunities for artists to come together and to grow and to create their own projects. So on this topic, I thought I'd just share a few of the questions that I see come up a lot with the artists when they're creating their work for different communities. So basically the questions that they are asking when they initiate or create a project is who are they creating that project for? Who is their audience? Are they speaking to a certain community? And most importantly, how do they engage and reach those communities and bring those communities to the theatre? How do they make it accessible? Because there's a lots of communities that have maybe never even been into a theatre. So how do they make that work able to reach them and bring them to the theatre as well? So those are the kind of main questions that I see coming up a lot in the artists' work that I do work with. And that's all from me, really.
That's so interesting, Heather. Can I just put those words into the questions you ask into the chat? Can you repeat those?
Yeah, sure. So it was, who are they creating their project for? Who is their audience? Are they speaking to a community?
Are they speaking to an audience?
Sorry, who is their audience? Are they speaking to a community? How do they engage and reach those communities and bring those communities to the theatre? So I think that's the most important question, really, is how do they engage them in the work they're creating? Maybe that might be that they're involved in the work, or they get to experience workshops that are related to the show that they're doing. And how do they reach those communities and actually bring those communities to the theatre? How can they make it accessible as well? Because theatre in London is extremely expensive. So if they're creating work for whatever community it is, how can they make that work reach them and bring them to the theatre?
Got it. That's very interesting. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much to my guests. Now I would like to suggest that we will cease recording unless Birdie, you would like to come off mute and ask your questions now before we stop recording. Birdie, would you like to do that? Hi.
Hi, get my mic in really. I'm just interested in thinking about what Natasha talked about money and power, and the sort of charisma that a group leader needs to have in order to lead a group. But also my instinct is always to subordinate myself to the group, the needs of the group, because I feel like that's the most authentic way of leading within a community. I'm trying to embark on a project at the moment, which is literally, I am part of the community. It's my community. I've just left a half-time job in academia. I've always been making theatre with groups, very often groups of students, but sometimes other types of groups. So there's a financial issue in that, how do I fund the work? How do I pay myself? Can I pay myself? Should I pay myself? And being part of a community, trying to set something up that's artistically has integrity and also serves the needs of that specific group of people, whether they are indicative of that community as well. So am I setting up a group that's quite sort of elite, or how do I open it out? There are so many questions to address at the beginning of a project, but this particular issue around leading and subordination, the sort of the facilitator's dilemma, really, I suppose you could call it, I think it's quite an interesting one to explore. I wonder if anybody had some comments on that, or maybe some anecdotal experiences that might help us to tease that out a bit.
Friday, thank you. That's really interesting. So the facilitator's dilemma, I'm going to put that into the chat. So Falguni, why don't we stop recording, and then we can, it's a free for all. Everybody can just unmute when they want to speak.